Hey, this is D. Olson of megalithicmarvels.com, and I am honored to be hanging with author, explorer, and what I would say is one of the premier megalithic and giant researchers in the world, Hugh Newman. Hugh, thanks for hanging with me today.
It's a pleasure, D.
So great to have you on. I've been a fan of your research for quite some time and really excited to learn and hear from you today. I got a lot of questions, so I think we should get started. You recently just came back from Egypt, and it was so incredible to see a lot of your pictures and videos online. So I wanted to ask you about that. What's your favorite ancient site that you visited in Egypt on this last trip?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's quite a lot of them, clearly. But I think the ones that fascinate me the most is probably the Assyrian, which is at Abydos, which is sort of down south, but it's north of Luxor, not too far from Dendera. But this is like, for the people that don't realize, it's a huge subterranean megalithic complex, not dissimilar in style, in some ways, to Stonehenge. It's got lintels and uprights, but very, very large blocks, some are up to 200 tons. And also, it's very similar to the Valley Temple on the Giza Plateau, which again is another fascinating place. And it's really these two places that really get my attention. Obviously, the three pyramids of Giza. There's something about those people just until you visit them and have a good look around them and get inside them, you don't realize how monstrous and incredibly technical they are. Like you're walking inside machines almost. But yeah, the Assyrian really cuts it for me. And on this trip, we had a chance to actually go inside it and inside all the sort of niches and along the passage and corridor. And so to get inside it and witness it and get a sense of it properly was really quite a special treat.
Incredible to hear about. I bet that was amazing to go inside. You recently wrote a fascinating series of articles titled The Giants of Ancient Egypt. So I wanted to ask you some about that. You talk about the ruling elite of the prehistoric Kemet with the elongated skulls, as well as all the legends that recount the Giza pyramids being built by giants. Tell us a little bit about that and anything you saw that corroborates with that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing you notice when you go to, some of the key sites in Egypt, like the Giza Plateau, the Assyrian Karnak even, is the sheer magnitude of some of these stones. They're just outrageously large. And it seems like the earlier culture there, which is probably constructed the Giza Plateau, the Sphinx, probably the Assyrian, and maybe some other temples that have been built over. That's really where you get this sort of extremely high level of megalithic technology and extremely large stones, and with no hieroglyphs really. There's no markings, there's no carvings. All you have is like polygonal walls, cyclopean blocks, which are just ridiculously large and very similar to Peru. As I know you've been there with Brian as well, and the similarities are kind of endless. You start looking carefully, and these granite polygonal blocks are often the same puffy shape with these like nodules, little keyboard buttons sticking out of them, and you really have to question who made them. And so this is where my research in giants, it kind of keeps popping into my head when I'm looking at this. So I decided with Jim Vieira, my co-author, we'd already collected a bunch of accounts from Egypt. In almost every country in the world we've gathered accounts from, and I decided to sort of do an article about this because I was going to go to Egypt. We're going again next March with the Kemet School, and Brian and Andrew Collins, and I really wanted to kind of get my head around it. And so I started looking into it, and there's numerous accounts from various different sources that talk about this. We have a couple of examples from 1881, which is really interesting, where we have a certain Professor Timmerman uncovered multiple over 7-foot skeletons and a skeleton that was over 11-foot tall, and this was at the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae. Now we know we actually went there on this previous trip, but there's no evidence of now really, because the whole temple has actually been moved from its original location to a very close location, brick by brick. And so that intrigued me. This was it was reported in the news in 1895 but originally accounted for in 1881. And they think the dating goes back to over 1000 BC for the giants that they were uncovering there. Now, this occurred in about 5 or 6 different newspapers back in the 1890s and was never heard from again. But we know at that time, this is when they were doing it. We know excavations were going on there at this time. We also have numerous other accounts. We have the classic story that Gregor Spory uncovered of this site 100 kilometers north of Cairo, where he got chatting to various people and eventually visited this family of grave robbers. And they discovered, they were showed this mummified finger, which was ridiculously long. I think like 13 inches long, something like that. And it really about 35 centimeters or 14 inches long. And this really baffled Gregor. He took loads of photos. They even showed him x-rays of it, and it was of a giant. He must have been about 16 feet tall. It was so big, and you can see that all in the article. I got some images. I talked to Gregor. I got permission to use his images, and that alone is really interesting because the x-rays confirmed it was human. Just the look of it and the feel of it was very human. It was like from a mummified figure, a mummified body. And it was 150 years ago that it was first excavated or looted, shall we say, by these grave robbers about 100 kilometers north of Cairo. They claim, though, that they actually the original mummy came from near Giza, possibly the Giza plateau. But we think that may have been a story created to kind of create intrigue and things like this. But yeah, there's a few other accounts. There's a few other stories throughout Egypt, into the old records, into the Arabian records even, which talk about legends of giants constructing pyramids. Not necessarily the Great Pyramid, but certainly Dashur pyramids, the red and the bent pyramid, for instance, where there's talk, this is only a few hundred years old, these accounts, these kind of Arabian stories, but they're really interesting nonetheless, and kind of hints that there are traditions of giants in ancient Egypt. Now there's numerous examples that keep occurring and keep popping up in the historical record that suggest it even might be a reality. So it kind of fits in with the research we were doing in North America. We're finding the similar stories and legends fitting in with actual discoveries.
Fascinating. Now, that finger that you talk about, I've seen photographs of it. Incredible image. Now, is that still able to be seen in some museum somewhere?
No, it was never in a museum. It was just a private collection of this family that Gregor Spory got access to. And he actually went back there a few years ago, and the family had disappeared. They weren't there anymore. So he couldn't get any more information on it. He offered to buy the finger initially. I mean, the family, if anyone knows them, they're called the Nagib family, Nagib. That's their surname. But that was the end of it, really, unfortunately. But it would be great to get DNA analysis on that and to get that properly checked out, because it's a really interesting story. If it's a fake, it's utterly brilliant fake that's been going around for a very long time. They haven't really made any money out of it, so why would they do it? So I think it's a genuine thing. But there's been 7-foot tall giants discovered recently. It was this Million Mummy Cemetery, it was called. This was reported just a few years ago, down at a site called Fagel Gumus, which is a strange site. It's more of a kind of later site, sort of very New Kingdom, Ptolemaic kind of area. But they found thousands of these burials, and one of them just happened to be over 7 feet tall. And it was so tall that when they buried him, they had to fold him in half and shove him into the grave. So not exactly a royal burial or anything like that, but yeah, interesting nonetheless.
Very interesting. I saw pictures of you guys at the Temple of the Sphinx. Tell us a little bit about that. And when I was back there, man, I think it was 08, 09. There's a lot of what appears to be megalithic construction there, correct?
Absolutely. You've got the Sphinx itself, but in front of it, to the east of it, you've got the Sphinx Temple, which is, and then to the right of that you've got the Valley Temple, which is one of the most fascinating sites I've ever seen in my life. But the Sphinx Temple, you can't go in. And it's huge limestone blocks, absolutely ridiculously big. Some are 250 tons. Others were 100 tons, and they're just so big, just placed, and they look like they've been weathered. Now, there's a big debate whether they were weathered while they were in situ, or whether they were weathered before they were placed there. And I'm getting they were weathered in situ, but it was almost like a sort of limestone sandwich between two bits of granite bread around the whole temple. So you have like an inner and outer granite wall, which has the polygonal, slightly puffy stonework with beautiful kind of machine worked curves in it, and things like this. Combined with the quite a rough hewn but extremely large limestone, all in the same construction, in the same walls. And then in the Valley Temple, you have, this is pretty much the same in both temples, although the Sphinx temples, most of the granite is gone now. But on the floor, in the Valley Temple, at least, you have an alabaster floor, which is really interesting. And it is evidence, you can clearly see it used to have water in it. So these were like water temples. And the whole Sphinx enclosure was full of water as well. And so that's a whole other aspect to this, which people don't realize, that the whole place was often flooded with Nile water. And it was part of the design, in my opinion, of many of these sites in Egypt. It was linked with water. And one of the weird things, which was probably in the Sphinx temple, but you could see it still in the Valley Temple, you probably know this yourself because you've been there, is the mirroring effect, where on one wall you have a whole bunch of different style polygonal blocks. Then on the opposite wall, it's mirrored, virtually mirrored. And it's like, and every wall is kind of like that. Even along the passageway between the Valley Temple and the Sphinx itself, you have the same thing. And there's a 10-sided stone similar to the 12-sided stone in Cusco. There's a 17-sided stone, which is in the doorway between the Valley Temple and the Sphinx, but that's because it's going 3D way, going in lots of different angles and different orientations. So yeah, it's pretty impressive. People don't realize how impressive the megalithic stonework is in Egypt. They tend to look at the hieroglyphics or the obelisks or the temples and things like this, but actually get down to basics, and the megalithic stonework is utterly remarkable, some of the best in the world.
Amazing to hear about. In your article about the Egyptian giants, you talk about the depictions of giants with elongated skulls found in the pyramid of, I think, is it the Saqqara? And all over in Egyptian art. Tell us about some of the depictions that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting photo which we kind of stumbled across from Saqqara. This is actually Zahi Hawass, the controversial former minister of antiquities in Egypt. And Saqqara was really supposedly the first proper megalithic style pyramid built in Egypt, probably around 2600, 2500 BC. And interestingly, there they discovered these wall paintings that looked like a bald priest figure with an elongated skull. And what's interesting as well is that there were numerous skeletons found there back in the 1930s, which were quite robust and quite strong and quite powerful looking, which suggests that they were a different type. They weren't like native stock. They were like a different type of person who was living there and probably building and designing these sites, which puts a whole new perspective on what was going on there. Let me just check here. I think it was actually, yes, Professor Walter Emery, who in the 1930s, he was uncovering things there. And he believed possibly that they could have been representations of the Shemshu Hor, or the followers of Horus, which were these pre-dynastic and going into the very early dynastic period. These kind of priestly elite who were like master, in my opinion, I think they were master masons. Some of them were described as giants. Even in the Edfu building text, you actually get a reference where one of them was 9 cubits tall, which is now, is easily over 15 feet tall. And so you have these, if you look carefully, you can keep finding these references, but also, as you mentioned, in Egyptian art, hieroglyphics, and obviously the statues like Karnak and Luxor and other places, you have these giant effigies, not only carved in 3D in perfect granite solid rock with perfect symmetry, machine tooled precision. You also have, just in basic Egyptian art, in various tombs and on different depictions on walls and things like this, but there's a bunch of people who are much taller than the other people. Now it could just be making themselves appear bigger and like more powerful or important or whatever, but it could be something else. It could actually be like a real representation.
Fascinating. I liked seeing your pick in front of the infamous light bulb depictions. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's Dendera. That's in one of the crypts. There's several of these crypts. I think there's about 9 or 10 of them, but only one is accessible, and they're very thin, they're very long, and you kind of go down these steps inside the temple. Then you take a left and a right along these thin passageways. The left one takes you to the end. On both sides of the wall, on the right and left, you have these depictions of these two gentlemen kind of holding up what looks like light bulbs. Now, this has caused much controversy. There's Traditionally they're thought to be other things, like the representations of lotus flowers and things like this, but there's almost like an electronic feel about it, the way all the different parts. And then you have to question, well, actually, how did they light up these passageways anyway? Because there's no evidence of fire, and so how did they light them up? And so I was actually in there with Nassim Haramein, who's like really into this ancient technology and science, trying to work out how they did these things. And he was just, equally as baffled, because they do seem to represent something. And then you have these serpents often in them as well, which sometimes means they're talking about earth energies, not always, but sometimes. So they're tapping into the natural electric telluric currents, which you get on the earth's surface anyway. So, and I believe that the ancients had a very good understanding of this. I mean, incidentally, I actually, talking about strange energies and lights and things like this, I actually filmed this strange ball of light raise up the Khafre's pyramid on the Giza plateau on the last day I was there. Maybe you can add that in here, but it's on the YouTube channel. I can give a link. It's on the Megalithic UK YouTube channel. And I couldn't believe it. And it's not a lens flare. It's not light reflection. It's not a plastic bag. It's not a drone or anything. It's actually like a strange ball of light rising up the face of the pyramid. And I was like, what the hell? When I checked back on my footage. So I filmed stuff like that there when I was there in 2012 as well. I couldn't believe it. So there is light phenomena going on there. And it makes me wonder if John Burke and Chris Dunn and other researchers are correct with the fact that they actually did have electricity, hence the Dendera light bulb imagery, and how they could carve and create such things in such pitch blackness. And maybe that was some of the purpose of these temples and pyramids anyway, because they were like, that was the way they would harness the energy. So yeah, there's a lot more going on there than people realize, and the Dendera light bulb was one of them anomalies.
Incredible. Yeah. For those who have never maybe seen the pictures or video of inside like the Great Pyramid of Giza, give us a little bit of an idea what it's like walking inside.
The Great Pyramid. That's one of the most strangest places in the world. I have this slight sense of terror when I go in there sometimes, because if that collapses on you, you're dead basically. Or if you get someone blocks it out for a joke, you're dead. It's like, because they were like sealed, like totally sealed when they were constructed, 100%. Not only with the limestone, what we see today, but with very fine, high quality white limestone casing blocks, which are perfectly flat, hermetically sealed. That's where the name came from, I believe. And so you go in now, they've kind of blown it open. You can walk in there now. You go into the first chamber. The first passage. You go into the passage, and then you can got options. You can either take a left turn and go down into the subterranean chamber, or you can kind of go up and to the right slightly, I think, and then go up to the grand gallery, or you can go down to go across to the Queen's chamber. So there's different ways of going in there, but I always go to the subterranean chamber because that's the most interesting one for me, much more so than the King or Queen's chamber. These are all rubbish names. They're not the correct names really. And you go in there, and for me, the whole thing feels like you're inside a machine, like you're inside a warehouse. It was never really supposed to be seen by people. It wasn't beautified. There's no frilly kind of lotuses or hieroglyphics, nothing. It's blank. It's a blank canvas. It's like precision engineered megalithic stonework everywhere you look. The subterranean chamber, you have to go down about 60, 80 feet. In a small passage, you have to kind of slide down there, climb down there. And then the whole chamber is really interesting. You've got like a big open space with a big deep bell inside the center, and at the back of it, you've got all this cut stone, and it's quite rough hewn. But when I was in there in 2012, I was so sick. I got this hugely nightmarish food poisoning that I couldn't shake off at all. It almost destroyed me. It was horrible, nauseous and sick, and I wasn't even going to go in there. But I went into the subterranean chamber, and while I was in there for just a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes in total, I was completely healed of my sickness, 100%. This was a really bizarre experience, which I can't quite understand to this day. But I just was not sick. The 20, 30 minutes I was in there, I came back out and I felt sick again. And so it's almost like there was some neutralizing, healing energy in that chamber, in the subterranean chamber, which cured me temporarily while I was in there. So whether that's the pyramid power thing or whether it's something else, I don't know. But then you come back up there, then you can head through to the Queen's Chamber. That's a little bit of a climb still, I think. I kind of forget the levels you go up. Not much in there really. They've got this big bit of technology in there now because they're doing scanning the pyramids. I think it's Swiss team or something. But it's just like a niche shaped like this, sort of going all the way up. It's about 20 feet tall. Not much else to see in there really. Then the King's Chamber, you go along a passage, and then that is just like going into like a small warehouse with a big coffin in it, square cut, precision cut granite coffin or coffer. That's it. That's all that's in there. And then a few fake modern lights, and it's not. It doesn't seem spiritual. It doesn't seem like it's a temple. It just doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's something much more profound. Like it really feels like alien in a way. I have to say that, even though I don't necessarily think aliens built it or anything, but I think it's got this alien feel about it. It's so old and it's so precise. It's like modern style, high technology, abstract art design. And I really can't quite understand it. It's baffling when you experience it, because people expect it to be more like a temple.
Right. Now, based on your research, what's your guesstimate on the timeline of when these megaliths were made in Egypt versus the dynastic period and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, officially the Giza pyramids are anything between 2500 BC, 2200 BC, something like that, based upon the so-called pharaohs that built them. Yeah, and that's slightly problematic because there's actually been some sonoluminescence dating done on some of the casing stones of the second and third pyramids, Khafre's and Menkaura's pyramid, and some from the Valley Temple actually, which date it to at least 300 or 400 years older than the official date. So there's no way those pharaohs could have built it. You know, they weren't the tombs for those pharaohs. They weren't tombs at all, probably. And so that's really interesting. And there's some dates that go back over 3,000 years in the sonoluminescence testing, but none have been done on the Great Pyramid. So we don't know. There's much more outrageous dates people are talking about. Some people think that the Ice Age are 10,500 years old, based upon the alignment of the Sphinx and the weathering of the Sphinx enclosure and things like this, which is, to me, is just as valid, because there's clear evidence of high stone technology at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which goes even older than that. It's 12,000 years old. So to me, it's quite plausible they could be that old. And then with the Assyrian, that really intrigues me because they're so deep in the ground and there's so many thousands of years of sand, debris that are built up there. It does suggest it's much older than what they say is, a couple of thousand BC at the most. And so, yeah, things like this are quite baffling. But there are, if you look at the Edfu building text, you look at the Abydos king lists and things like this, you have an extreme antiquity where they talk about these ancient kings, pharaohs and rulers going back to the time of the gods, the followers of Horus, and before that the time of the gods, going back 39 to 40,000 years old. So whether there's any reality to that, I don't know, but if that's the case, then some of them could be much older than people realize.
Fascinating. Absolutely incredible to think about the age of that. One more question relating to Egypt, and that is, I believe you've been to Australia to investigate some of the anomalies there, namely the Gosford glyphs. What's your take on that? Do you think they're authentic?
The Gosford glyphs, yeah, there's more controversy there. Crikey, yeah, just a bit. Yeah, they're interesting. I mean, I went there twice. I went there for one afternoon. I went there in the morning to catch the light at a different angle. They're really hard to find. They're not easy. And the area they're in is very strange because as you're trying to find them and walking up to the area they're kind of carved in, there's all these simulacra everywhere, like these sort of shapes in the rocks that look like Egyptian, like shapes, like sort of pharaohs and sphinxes and Anubis and things like this. So it's kind of spooky, and it has this real magical quality about this particular part of the landscape. So that really got me when I kind of was there before I even found them. And then when you find them, they're in this kind of chasm. You have to crawl through this tiny hole, climb up a bit, and then on two sides, you've got these two walls of hieroglyphs parallel to each other, only like 5 feet apart. And some of them are clearly not that good. They're not that well carved, nothing like you find in Egypt. I mean, you'd be hard to find anything so primitive in Egypt. But if they are real, which they could be, some of them at least, it does throw a whole sort of light on the idea that the Egyptians travel around the world. But I'm not 100% convinced. But I'm not convinced they're not real as well, because I know the Kemet School looked at them and they analysed them and they interpreted them, and it was quite compelling what they came up with. It wouldn't be just a bunch of kids rubbing it. People must have known what they were doing. And they dated it to a certain period. I think, was it 1600 BC or something like this, based upon the type of hieroglyphs they were using. But to me, I just wanted to go there, witness it and see it for myself. Some of them are clearly added later. Some of them are like joke hieroglyphs, which you can see in the videos and the photos. But some of them are just really interesting, and some of them are extremely high up. So how they did that, whether they must have had ladders or climbing on each other's shoulders or giants doing them, it is really quite intriguing. But then you've got other discoveries that have potentially been found in Australia, which link to Egypt. In Egypt as well, in one of the museums there, I think in Aswan, they have what, it looks like a boomerang, which is potentially not just Australia, maybe it's used all around the world. There's one even in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, from ancient Egypt. That's from the pre-dynastic. That's from the it's like 3,300 BC, found again near Abydos. And so there are connections, and I think more research needs to be done before any hard, solid conclusions can be made.
Thanks for sharing about that. Wanted to ask you about your new book. Super excited about it. Stone Circles, just released, right?
Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
Just released. Please give readers, there it is, an idea about what they can find in the book.
It's just a little book. It's not huge. It's a little wooden book. It's part of this series that is edited and published by John Martineau, based in Glastonbury. The book is really just a summary of stone circles around the world, not just in England, but all over the planet, including Göbekli Tepe, including even some in Australia, some even in Egypt, like with the Nabta Playa. Even in Peru, Silistani, there's some stone circles. And yeah, we really give a thorough examination of the whole stone circle phenomenon, going from the earliest ones all through, especially the 1,000 or so that have been found in Britain, all the different geometries and the mathematics and the secrets and the strange energy effects of some of them, activities that have been going on there. And yeah, it's quite a thorough little book looking at all different aspects and looking at why they were used, why they were built in such a way, and how they could have done it. Because some of the stones are so huge, like obviously we find in Egypt as well, that we have to question how primitive man apparently could have built such things. So yeah, and it's kind of the ultimate little book on stone circles, I think. I mean, we really went into the research. We did enough research to write a sort of 400-page mega book, and to condense it down into this small kind of pocket wooden book.
Very exciting. I'm going to be ordering my book soon. Definitely want to learn about that. Obviously, Stonehenge is one of the most famous stone circles people probably know about. What would you say is maybe some stone circles that people don't know about that are also pretty amazing to learn about?
There's quite a few, actually. Oh my God! I mean, Stonehenge is unique. Just to be clear with people, there's no other stone circle like it in Britain. It's one of 1,000 at least that have been found here. And I live just down the road from it nowadays. But there's nothing else like it. Even Avebury is not like it. Avebury is like rough-hewn, mega large stones. Some of them weighing 100 tons. Uh, and even Avebury is not that well known. Not many people even know about that, but it's one of the most important sites on the planet, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, there's so many across England and Britain. It's just to name but a few. I mean, there's a couple that grab my attention. There's a couple of lost stone circles which really interest me that were once there. There's one that even a church or a cathedral has been built over. And you can actually still see it in its foundation. I've still yet to visit this one, but I believe it's in Devonshire or Devon. So that intrigues me. Yeah, there's many lost stone circles near Avebury. There were ones even near Stonehenge, which have, there's one called Blue Stonehenge, which was at the other end of the avenue, this earthen avenue, which joined Avebury with the River Avon down in Amesbury, and there's potentially a blue stone circle, the blue stone coming from Wales, by the way, like we find in Stonehenge as well, which has been lost. There was even stone circles at the Bluestone site in Wales where they quarried the stone for Stonehenge, which have been lost as well. So there's a lot going on. I mean, if people want to get a good, thorough download about all the different circles, get the book and also check out Andy Burnham's brilliant website, megalithic.co.uk, which has every site in Britain marked and recorded on it.
So, Hugh, tell us about the giants of Stonehenge.
Yeah, one of the things that intrigues me about Stonehenge is the name of it. It's firstly, Stonehenge is a name given in Saxon times. It kind of means hanging stones, more or less. But the earliest known name is actually the Giant's Dance, which goes back to, it was recorded at least in the 1100s by Geoffrey of Monmouth. In his book, The History of the Kings of Britain, but it's obviously much, much older, because it's always thought that most of these megalithic sites in Britain were constructed by giants. And this is a book we're working on now with Jim Vieira, is about the ancient giants of Stonehenge in Britain, to kind of get, put it in perspective relating to the North American giants. But it comes from a book called The History of the Kings of Britain. But even the earliest depiction of Stonehenge is this illustration by a poet called Robert Wace, which was 30, 50 years later, in a version of The History of the Kings of Britain, a French version. And it shows a giant lifting one of the lintels of Stonehenge into place, like a 14-foot giant, with Merlin and probably King Ambrosius, who was the king who ordered the construction of Stonehenge, according to the book, which is obviously slightly got a few mistakes in it that aren't based on real history. But the stones originally in the History of the Kings of Britain were said to have come from North Africa, brought over by giants to Ireland, left there and built there. It was fully constructed there thousands of years, and eventually King Ambrosius ordered Merlin and his army to go and get the stones from Ireland and bring them to Salisbury Plain in honor of himself for when he dies. And so Merlin, waited for the army. The army couldn't move them, couldn't even uproot the stones or lift them anywhere. So he went over there, used his magical powers, or what's called gears for some reason, and actually brought them over effortlessly to the Salisbury Plain and built them. And so this is interesting because some of the stones come from, it was a long time thought some of the stones actually came from Ireland because of this story, but actually in southwest Wales, in Preseli, some of the stones actually did come from, which is not too far from Ireland if you just jump over the very thin stretch of sea there. So there is some kind of truth in that story. But interestingly, the actual giants have been found. There's 9'4" giant was found in Salisbury, right near Stonehenge. There's a 14-foot giant was found and reported in 2 different accounts. There's other giants, even the Bush Barrow Lozenge man, who was in a mound very close to Stonehenge, was robust. He was well over 6 feet, 6.5 feet tall. There's other accounts in the whole area. So there's direct relationship with giants and Stonehenge, which a lot of people don't realize.
Fascinating to hear about. And relating to that, in one of your presentations, I liked where you showed this map of Europe and it pinpointed where all these giant skeletons have been discovered in relation to all the megaliths. It was fascinating to see. There's definitely something going on there. Well, Hugh, thank you so much for your time. Where is the best place for readers and viewers to purchase your new book?
Yeah, well, the Little Stone Circles book, that's out on Amazon. It's also on my website, hugnewman.co.uk. It's all over. It's in shops. You've got a very good distribution with this one, so they can get that there. yeah, there's if people want to, there's more information about my research on megalithomania.co.uk. And people really should check out the YouTube channel. We've got like 550 videos up on YouTube and the Megalithomania UK YouTube channel. And like yourself, I'm a bit of an explorer, so part of my job really is to host tours around the world as well. I've just been in Egypt, and it enables people like myself and Brian and others to actually get out there, because we don't have any funding. We're completely self-funded, so we spend all our any penny we get on our research and our travel. So we encourage people to support us and come and join us on tours, and join us at the conference, which we do in May, which people can join us there. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We hope to see people around.
So your next, tell us about the next tour coming up that you are hosting.
Yeah, we've got one. We're doing a Peru one with Brian and Robert Buval. That's happening in November. But the one we still have a few spaces on the Mexico one. We're doing a sort of Maya, Toltec, and Olmec tour throughout most of the major sites in Mexico in January for like 2 weeks solid. That's going to be quite epic, and my co-author Jim Vieira is going to be there. We're going to be so we found a whole bunch of accounts in Mexico about giants, which is we want to kind of investigate while we're there. So it'll be a bit of a kind of research trip as well, so people can get involved in the research and the discoveries. That's kind of way we like to do it.
Exciting. Well, I hope to join you on one of your tours soon. And everybody watching, definitely go to megalithomania.co.uk or hughNewman.co.uk. Follow Hugh, follow the YouTube channels. They've got a great Facebook group as well with incredible pictures and stuff people share. And learn about the tours, buy the books, and go on a tour if you can. It's a really incredible thing to do. Well, Hugh, thanks again, man, for your time. And
Thank you.
can't wait to get this book and start reading.
All right, thanks so much, Dee. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Cheers.